Resistance Fall of Man was one of the launch titles for the PlayStation 3. The game launched on November 14th, 2007. It's kind of funny because it actually makes it a pre-launch title, since the PlayStation 3 didn't officially launch until November 17th of 2007. So technically, you could buy a game 3 days before the system came out. Regardless, Resistance Fall of Man has been hailed as one of the killer apps of the PlayStation 3. It easily sold over 1 million copies and became one of the first greatest hits of the PlayStation 3 line. Resistance Fall of Man follows the story of Nathan Hale, an American soldier sent to fight the war in Europe. Fighting against Russian forces, people quickly found out that the Russians had been infected by an alien race known as the Chimera. The aliens have brought new technology and new means of fighting to Earth, and you must fight against them in this first-person shooter. Now, Resistance 2 came to North America on November 4th, 2008, and once again it became an instant hit, selling thousands and thousands of copies. This time you're following Nathan Hale in the United States instead of Europe. He's also part of a special task force of soldiers called the Sentinels. Now, like Nathan Hale, all of them have been infected with the Chimeran virus, but none of them have turned into these alien-human hybrids. This time they're going up against Daedalus. Daedalus is another Earthling who was infected by the virus, but this time he became the head of the Chimerans here on Earth. There's a psychic link between Hale and Daedalus, which kind of plays into the whole storyline, making it interesting on whether or not Hale will fully transform or fully give in to the alien threat. Resistance Retribution just came out a couple weeks ago here on March 17th, and this time it's on the PSP instead of the PlayStation 3. This follows the story of the British Royal Marine Lieutenant James Grayson, and he's still in Europe after the Chimeran Tower fell in London at the end of the original Resistance Fall of Man. Instead of a first-person shooter, it's a third-person shooter. You're kind of looking over his shoulder as you're playing on the PSP. So now you're thinking, we've got 2 hit PlayStation games and a brand new PSP game. What else could there possibly be out there for Resistance Fall of Man? Of course, a comic book series, this time from Wildstorm Comics, an imprint of DC. Wildstorm originally started as Homage Studios within Image Comics, but after a while Jim Lee kind of got fed up with Rob Liefeld and Eric Larson, decided to go back to DC Comics, sold them the imprint, became Wildstorm, and has now turned the company into more of a licensing machine, doing comic books based on things like The X-Files and Gears of War, Mirror's Edge, and of course Resistance Fall of Man, which is what we're taking a look at today.
Okay, so I know what you're thinking, and you're right, it does bring out my eyes. This is a nice mask. But for the rest of you, I know what you're thinking, and maybe Jim Lee didn't leave Image Comics just because he was fed up with Eric Larson and Rob Liefeld. Fine. If you want to have it that way, you can. The point remains, though, that Wildstorm is now a part of DC Comics, and it's treated like any other imprint in the history of DC Comics, from Impact to Milestone to Vertigo, now Wildstorm. And Wildstorm, of course, puts out our Resistance comic books. What you might not know, though, is that Resistance number 1 is not the first Resistance comic. As a matter of fact, a press kit went out to several retail locations before Resistance 2 hit stores. It was a way to just kind of hype up the game a little bit, get people interested. Inside there was this nice envelope here, and inside were a bunch of goodies related to Resistance 2. So you had this nice little book here, full of full-color artwork, things like that. The Art of Resistance 2. Nice, slick, glossy book. You also had some information. There's a letter kind of explaining some of the stuff about the game, some of the hype surrounding it. You had this little card you could put in a binder, put on the shelf so people knew about the game before it came out. But most importantly, you had the Resistance 2 comic book. Now, this was not sold in stores. So if you know anybody who has one of these, they got it from the retail location. It's a pretty slick book. It's actually a pretty nice intro into the world of Resistance 2. And it's actually written by Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning. They're the same guys who do all that great outer space stuff at Marvel. As a matter of fact, they do Nova, which is actually one of my favorite books at Marvel right now. And if you're not reading Nova, you might want to check it out. But they wrote this book. Also, the art was done by a guy named John Paul Leon with C.P. Smith. Now, John Paul Leon is actually one of my favorite artists. Very dark style. Lots of thick lines, very moody. All in all, a great book. And a great introduction to the world of Resistance for people who might not have been all that familiar with it. Now, for people who are big fans and really wanted to get into it, you've got the regular series. Now, the series is set to run 6 issues, and so far, number 5 is the most recent issue. In fact, it just came out this week. Well, it came out this week at the time of filming this. If you're watching this in the year 2013, then this is just going to sound wrong. But trust me, that when we're filming this right now, this is fresh off the presses. But so far, you've got 5 issues. From Wildstorm, the covers are very nice. The paper, very slick. High quality. These books, though, a little more expensive, $3.99 an issue. Question is, really, are they worth it?
Okay, call me crazy, but I'm going to assume that if you're watching this video, especially 7 minutes into it, you're the type of person who already reads comics and plays video games anyway. So the question is, should you be reading Resistance? Now, granted, they took a video game and they base a comic book off of it. That's usually a recipe for disaster. In fact, anytime they seem to take a movie, TV show, video game, even a novel, and turn it into a comic book, the results are less than impressive. Luckily, though, Resistance actually breaks out of that problem. It's actually a very well-written and entertaining book. Resistance, every issue is broken into 2 parts. You've got your main feature and your backup feature. Your main feature actually follows the Sentinel team that you see in Resistance 2. It tells you a little bit more about how they came together and worked as a team, how they kind of lost some team members and how they kind of changed, but it's about their mission going into Alaska and trying to figure out what's going on in the army base there. They're finding out that the Chimera are trying to get a hold of nukes out of the Alaskan base. So you've got a pretty compelling story going on here. Your backup feature is about James Grayson. Now, he's the guy that you meet in Resistance Retribution on the PSP. So you're actually getting his life story, telling you everything that happened to him leading up to what you find in Resistance Retribution. Both of these features, the main feature and the backup story, are really well done. In fact, you almost kind of wish that the backup feature had been saved for its own one-shot, and that they were allowed to expand your main feature and give it those extra pages. Because really, both stories are really, really good. If you like war comics, action comics, sci-fi comics, or you're just a huge nerd for the Resistance universe, then you definitely want to check these out. And even if you haven't played any of the games, you're really going to enjoy these comics if you just sit down and read them. In fact, I'd have to say that of all the video game adaptations that are going on in comics right now, this is probably the best, if not in the top, 3. Because with all the other stuff out there on the market, it's easy for you to miss something like this, and I'd really hate for you to miss it, because this is really a good comic book series. Well, there it is. The first episode of From Pixels to Paper, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you'll come back and check us out again next time. Who knows what we'll be talking about next? Mirror's Edge? Resident Evil? Prototype? Double Dragon? I even hear there's a comic series based off this blue hedgehog guy that has a couple fans out there. Maybe we'll look into some of these someday. Feel free to drop by VGLosers.com, join our message board, tell me what you thought about the episode, and maybe give me some ideas for the future. Thanks again, guys, and we'll see you later.